20-year-old Frederick Valentich had dreams of becoming a commercial pilot. He'd spent countless hours in the cockpit, building his experience one flight at a time. But on a clear Saturday evening in October 1978, during what should have been a routine flight over the Bass Strait, something went terribly wrong. What started as a simple trip to King Island became a mystery that would captivate the world because Frederick Valentich didn't just crash or get lost. He vanished completely, leaving behind only a haunting radio transmission about strange lights and an object that was not an aircraft. Frederick Valentich was an Australian pilot who disappeared while on a 125 nautical mile flight in a Cessna 182L light aircraft, registered VHDSJ, over Bass Strait. On the evening of Saturday, 21st October 1978, 20-year-old Valentich informed Melbourne Air Traffic Control that he was being accompanied by an aircraft about 1,000 feet above him and that his engine had begun running roughly before finally reporting, "It's not an aircraft." The story begins in Melbourne, where a young man with big dreams was trying to make his way into the world of aviation. Frederick Valentich was born June 9, 1958 in Melbourne to Italian immigrant parents. Frederick was the oldest child and he had 3 siblings, his younger brother Ricky and his younger twin sisters Olivia and Lara. His parents, Guido and Alberta, had come to Australia from Trieste, Italy, hoping to build a better life for their family. Growing up in Avondale Heights, Frederick wasn't the best student. Growing up, Frederick was very athletic, but he didn't do very well at the other subjects in school. But what he lacked in academic achievement, he made up for with determination and a singular passion: flying. From a young age, Frederick knew exactly what he wanted to do with his life. He wanted to soar through the skies, to become a commercial pilot, to make aviation his career. At the time of his disappearance, he lived at home with his parents and 3 siblings in Avondale Heights, and he was a shop assistant at an army disposal store in Moonee Ponds. Frederick was a member of the Air Training Corps and was absolutely determined to have a career in aviation. His path to the cockpit wasn't easy. He had twice applied to enlist in the Royal Australian Air Force, RAAF, but was rejected because of inadequate educational qualifications. The rejection stung, but Frederick didn't give up. If the military wouldn't take him, he'd find another way to fly. Valentich was studying part-time to become a commercial pilot, but had a poor achievement record, having twice failed all 5 commercial license examination subjects. As recently as the month before his disappearance, Valentich had failed 3 more commercial license subjects. These failures must have weighed heavily on him. Here was a young man who wanted nothing more than to fly professionally, yet the exams kept getting in his way. By October 1978, Frederick had accumulated about 150 hours of flying time. Frederick Valentich had about 150 total hours of flying time and held a Class 4 instrument rating, which meant he could fly at night, but only in clear weather conditions where he could see the horizon. It wasn't much experience, but it was enough to rent a plane and continue building his hours. His flying record wasn't perfect, though. He had been involved in flying incidents, for example, straying into a controlled zone in Sydney, for which he received a warning, and twice deliberately flying into a cloud, for which prosecution was being considered. These incidents painted a picture of a young pilot who was perhaps overconfident, maybe a bit careless, still learning the rules of the sky. But there was something else about Frederick Valentich that would become crucial to understanding what happened that October night. According to his father Guido, Valentich was an ardent believer in UFOs and had been worried about being attacked by them. This wasn't just a passing interest. He did say that he knew his son was a firm believer in UFOs and had read a book called Chariots of the Gods, Unsolved Mysteries of the Past. The book, which suggested that ancient civilizations had been visited by extraterrestrials, had clearly made an impression on young Frederick. He also said that a recent camping trip to Gippsland with the Air Training Corps had really solidified Frederick's beliefs. He had been allowed to view the RAF's secret files on UFOs, but he refused to reveal any information he discovered, since the information was classified. Even more telling, 6 days before his disappearance, Valentich discussed with his girlfriend Rhonda Rushton the possibility of a UFO taking him away, according to her. This conversation would later take on an eerie significance. Was it just the idle speculation of a young man fascinated by the unknown, or was it something more, a premonition, perhaps? On the evening of October 21st, 1978, Frederick arrived at Moorabbin Airport with a plan. A little after 6 in the evening, with a full tank of fuel, Frederick Valentich took off from Moorabbin Airport in Melbourne in a 4-seat, single-engine Cessna 182L light aircraft, registered VHDSJ. He told authorities he was flying to King Island to pick up some friends, though this would later be questioned. Another strange element to the story of the Frederick Valentich disappearance was that despite flying at night, he didn't make arrangements for the runway lights at King Island to be switched on. The weather was perfect for flying. On the evening of October 21st, 1978, winds were light and the visibility was good. The Bass Strait, which separates mainland Australia from Tasmania, can be treacherous, but on this night, conditions were ideal. After departure, the pilot established two-way radio communications with Melbourne Flight Service Unit, FSU. Everything seemed normal as Frederick headed southwest along the Victorian coast. He checked in at Cape Otway at 7 p.m. right on schedule. For the first 40 minutes of the flight, nothing seemed amiss. Then at 7:06 p.m., everything changed. At 7:06 p.m., Frederick radioed the Melbourne Flight Service, and that evening, Steve Roby answered the radio call. Here is the transcript. Frederick, Melbourne. This is Delta Sierra Juliet. Is there any known traffic below 5,000 feet? Steve Roby, the air traffic controller on duty that night, would later become haunted by what he heard. Roby. No known traffic. But Frederick insisted something was there. Frederick, there seems to be a large aircraft below 5,000. Frederick, I cannot affirm. It is for bright. It seems to me like landing lights. What followed was one of the most bizarre and chilling radio exchanges in aviation history. Frederick described an object with 4 bright lights that seemed to be following him, moving at incredible speed. He was unable to confirm its type, but said that it had passed about 1,000 feet, 300 minutes overhead, and was moving at high speed. It's approaching now from due east towards me, Frederick reported, his voice betraying growing concern. Valentich then reported that the aircraft was approaching him from the east and said that the other pilot might be purposely toying with him. Steve Roby tried to make sense of what he was hearing. He wasn't to the point where he was panicking, but he was genuinely concerned by what he saw. With what he saw, he was worried. He sounded confused. This was no joke, no prank. The young pilot was genuinely frightened by whatever was up there with him. The object's behavior defied conventional explanation. Valentich said that the aircraft was orbiting above him, and that it had a shiny metal surface and a green light on it. No known aircraft moves the way Frederick was describing, hovering, disappearing, reappearing, circling at impossible speeds. Then came another alarming development. Valentich further reported that he was experiencing engine problems. The Cessna's engine began to run roughly, adding mechanical failure to an already terrifying situation. The transmission was followed by 17 seconds of unexplained metallic scraping sounds, after which all contact with Valentich was lost. Those 17 seconds of sound would be analyzed countless times in the years to come. This was followed by 17 seconds of unidentified noise, described as being metallic scraping sounds. Then all contact was lost. What could make such a sound? Was it the aircraft breaking apart? Was it interference from whatever Frederick had encountered? No one could say for certain, a search and rescue alert was given at 1912. When Frederick failed to arrive at King Island by 7:33 p.m., authorities knew something was terribly wrong. A sea and air search was undertaken that included ocean-going ship traffic, an RAF Lockheed P-3 Orion aircraft, plus 8 civilian aircraft. The search encompassed over 1,000 square miles, 2,600 kilometer dune. Search efforts ceased on 25 October 1978 without result. For 4 days, search teams scoured the Bass Strait. Ships crisscrossed the waters where Frederick should have been. Aircraft flew grid patterns, looking for any sign of wreckage, an oil slick, debris, anything that might indicate where the Cessna had gone down. But the sea gave up nothing. It was as if Frederick Valentich and his aircraft had simply vanished into thin air. Analysis of a fuel slick found roughly near where Valentich had last radioed, Roby proved that it was not aviation fuel, and no trace of the aircraft was found. The Cessna was equipped with life jackets and an emergency beacon. It was designed to float for several minutes if it ditched in water. Yet nothing was found. An investigation into Valentich's disappearance by the Australian Department of Transport was unable to determine the cause, but it was presumed fatal for Valentich. But the story didn't end with the official search. In the days following Frederick's disappearance, something extraordinary happened. People started coming forward with their own accounts of strange sights in the sky that night. There were belated reports of a UFO sighting in Australia on the night of the disappearance. Though authorities were skeptical, Ken Williams, a spokesperson for the Department of Transport, told reporters, "It's funny all these people ringing up with UFO reports well after Valentich's disappearance." Among the witnesses was a bank manager named Colin Morgan and his wife. Bank manager Colin Morgan and his wife reported seeing a large, glowing, star-shaped object hovering in the sky for nearly 1 hour Saturday night near the town of Geelong, 35 miles southwest of Melbourne. "It seemed to be cruising almost above us as we drove down a highway," Morgan said. "It was bright and had green flickering lights at one end." Residents of King Island have reported sightings of strange, bright and trailing lights over the past 6 weeks. These reports suggested that whatever Frederick encountered might not have been an isolated incident, but perhaps the most compelling witness account came from an anonymous source who claimed to have seen something extraordinary that night. Around the time of Valentich's disappearance, an eyewitness and his family were returning from an afternoon outing when they noticed unusual activity in the sky. "The witness has asked that we do not reveal his identity. I looked up and saw this long green light about 1,000 or 2,000 feet above the aircraft. So we sat there and watched it for a few seconds, and the green light crept closer to the plane. I said, 'That plane is coming down pretty steep. It's on a 45-degree angle.' I said, 'I think it's going to crash.' This witness never saw whether the plane actually crashed. The aircraft disappeared from view, leaving only questions about what had transpired in those final moments. 6 weeks after the disappearance, Roy Manifold, an amateur photographer, came forward with evidence that would add another layer to the mystery. On the evening of the flight, Roy Manifold had been setting up to photograph a sunset at Cape Otway, which was almost directly under Valentich's flight path. Manifold had been taking routine sunset photographs when he captured something unexpected. An image captured by Roy Manifold shortly before Valentich's transmission shows a fast-moving object. When he developed the film, one frame showed what appeared to be a fast-moving object in the sky. The group Ground Saucer Watch, based in Phoenix, Arizona, United States, claims that photos taken by plumber Roy Manifold on the day of Valentich's disappearance show a fast-moving object exiting the water near Cape Otway Lighthouse. According to UFO writer Jerome Clark, Ground Saucer Watch argued that they showed a bona fide unknown flying object of moderate dimensions, apparently surrounded by a cloud-like vapor exhaust residue. Although the pictures were not clear enough to identify the object, the photograph was analyzed by experts who confirmed that the image hadn't been tampered with. A leading Australian photo lab found neither dirt nor damage on the negative, determining that the strange mark was actually in the picture. Whatever Manifold had captured, it was really there. As investigators dug deeper into Frederick's background, they uncovered details that might explain why he was particularly susceptible to misinterpreting what he saw that night. Or alternatively, why he might have been targeted. Apparently his wife, Alberta, had recently seen a UFO with Frederick, and they described it as a large light and said it was about 10 times the size of the largest star. The object remained stationary for a bit before shooting off at a high speed. This shared experience with his mother would have reinforced Frederick's beliefs about extraterrestrial visitors. 5 years after Frederick's disappearance, a discovery was made that briefly rekindled hope of solving the mystery. 5 years after Valentich's aircraft went missing, an engine cowl flap was found washed ashore on Flinders Island. In July 1983, the Bureau of Air Safety Investigation asked the Royal Australian Navy Research Laboratory, RANRL, about the likelihood that the cowl flap might have travelled to its ultimate position from the region where the aircraft disappeared. The Bureau noted that the part has been identified as having come from a Cessna 182 aircraft between a certain range of serial numbers, which included Valentich's aircraft. This discovery suggested that Frederick's plane had indeed crashed somewhere in the Bass Strait, but it raised as many questions as it answered. How had this single piece travelled so far? Why was nothing else ever found? It had a partial serial number on it that did not match the serial number from his plane. Several people believed that it came from his plane, but this has not been conclusively determined, as other similar planes had lost the same part in the same area in the early 1980s. Over the years, numerous theories have been proposed to explain what happened to Frederick Valentich. Each has its supporters and detractors, and none can fully account for all the strange elements of that October night. The most conventional explanation is pilot disorientation. Some of their officials speculated that Valentich became disorientated and saw his own lights reflected in the water, or lights from a nearby island while flying upside down. This theory suggests that Frederick became confused, perhaps flying inverted without realizing it, and mistook reflections for another aircraft. A 2013 review of the radio transcripts and other data by astronomer and retired United States Air Force pilot James McGaha and author Joe Nickell proposes that the inexperienced Valentich was deceived by the illusion of a tilted horizon for which he attempted to compensate and inadvertently put his aircraft into a downward, so-called graveyard spiral, which he initially mistook for simple orbiting of the aircraft. According to the authors, the G-forces of a tightening spiral would decrease fuel flow, resulting in the rough idling reported by Valentich. This graveyard spiral theory is compelling in its simplicity. It explains the engine problems, the sensation of being followed, even the final crash. But it doesn't fully account for the witness sightings or the photograph taken by Roy Manifold. Another theory that has been proposed is that Frederick staged his own disappearance. It has also been proposed that Valentich staged his own disappearance, even taking into account a trip of between 30 and 45 minutes to Cape Otway. The single-engine Cessna 182 still had enough fuel to fly 800 kilometers, 500 meters deep. Despite ideal conditions, at no time was the aircraft plotted on radar, casting doubts as to whether it was ever near Cape Otway. And Melbourne police received reports of a light aircraft making a mysterious landing not far from Cape Otway at the same time as Valentich's disappearance. The suicide theory has also been examined. There has also been speculation that Valentich committed suicide. According to ufologist Keith Basterfield, interviews with doctors and colleagues who knew him virtually eliminated this possibility. Those who knew Frederick described him as someone who, despite his struggles with exams, was optimistic about his future in aviation. Perhaps the most controversial theory involves the influence of popular culture. According to Brian Dunning, Valentich's radio conversation was similar to the dialogue from a scene in the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which was released less than a year before the disappearance and was popular among pilots, young people and UFO fans. Dunning speculated that it is possible that Valentich was trying to imitate the scene for fun and deliberately made his aircraft fly in a circular pattern in order to give the radar guys something to see, but accidentally became disorientated and crashed into the water. This theory suggests a tragic accident born from a young pilot's attempt at a prank. But what about the UFO theory? For many, the circumstances of Frederick's disappearance point to something truly extraordinary. The witness accounts, the photograph, Frederick's own description of the object, all suggest an encounter with something beyond conventional explanation. Ufologists have claimed that a UFO either destroyed Valentich's aircraft or abducted him, saying that some individuals reported seeing an erratically moving green light in the sky, and that he was in a steep dive at the time. Ufologists believe these accounts are significant because of the green light mentioned in Valentich's radio transmissions. The green light detail is particularly intriguing because Frederick mentioned it in his transmission, and multiple witnesses reported seeing green lights that night. Some witnesses who saw Valentich's plane said a green light was following the aircraft. However, skeptics point out that the Mount Stromlo Observatory noted that there was a meteorite stream that night, with 10 to 15 sightings per hour. Could Frederick have seen a particularly bright meteor and, given his interest in UFOs, misinterpreted what he was seeing? There's another possibility that combines elements of several theories. McGaha and Nickel also proposed that the apparently stationary overhead lights that Valentich reported were probably the planets Venus, Mars, and Mercury. The power of suggestion, combined with Frederick's existing beliefs about UFOs, might have caused him to connect these celestial bodies into a single object. The green light could have been part of this confusion also. Remember, Valentich's first description of the UFO involved only 4 bright white lights. He made no mention at that time of a green one. It could actually have been nothing more than the Cessna's own navigation light on its right wing tip. That green light, or its reflection on the windshield, could easily have been superimposed onto the UFO sighting. This theory elegantly explains many aspects of the case, but it still leaves questions. If Frederick was simply disoriented, why were there so many witness reports of unusual lights that night? Why did Roy Manifold's photograph show an unidentified object? Years after the disappearance, researcher Keith Basterfield made a significant discovery. For years, the official report on Valentich's disappearance remained lost in the bureaucracy, or so was the official statement. Yet during an online search, by pure chance, Basterfield discovered that a part of the lost report was hidden in plain sight. Digitized in the National Archives, this report reveals that investigators actually found plane wreckage in 1983. The wreckage had a partial serial number, the decipherable part of which appears to fall within the series of which Valentich's plane was part. This discovery suggested that more was known about the case than had been publicly revealed. The human cost of this mystery often gets lost in the speculation about UFOs and conspiracies. We must remind ourselves that a family waits for an answer that so far has never come. I hope that someday they will find that answer. Sadly, Guido Valentich's Frederick S. father passed away recently. He maintained a regular annual vigil, hoping for a sense of certainty about the fate of his son. For Frederick's family, the disappearance wasn't just a mystery to be solved. It was a devastating loss. His father, Guido, spent years searching for answers, never giving up hope that someday he might learn what happened to his eldest son. His mother, Alberta, had to live with the memory of that UFO sighting she'd shared with Frederick, wondering if it had somehow played a role in his fate. A plaque was placed in the grounds of the Cape Otway light station near the weather station by Valentich's family and friends. It serves as a memorial to a young man whose dreams of flight ended in the most mysterious way possible. Steve Roby, the air traffic controller who spoke with Frederick that night, has never forgotten those final transmissions. I spoke to Steve Roby in 1999. He indicated to me that he still feels the disappearance of Frederick Valentich is a mystery. Roby told me, "I don't believe he was disorientated. I don't believe he faked it or committed suicide. He sounded under stress and sounded very genuine. He was definitely concerned about what he was looking at. He feels there is some sort of UFO connection, and he feels that officials are keeping the UFO subject under wraps." I lean towards a UFO connection, coming from the man who actually heard Frederick's voice that night, who could gauge his emotional state. This assessment carries significant weight. The disappearance of Frederick Valentich has become more than just an aviation mystery. It's become a cultural touchstone, a case that captures our fascination with the unknown. It's become the most famous Australian UFO abduction case in history. Part of what makes this case so compelling is how it straddles the line between the explainable and the inexplicable. On one hand, we have a young, relatively inexperienced pilot flying over water at night, conditions that have claimed many aircraft. His fascination with UFOs, his recent exam failures, the stress he must have been under, all these factors could have contributed to a tragic accident. On the other hand, we have the witness testimonies, the photograph, the strange circumstances of the flight itself. Why didn't Frederick arrange for the runway lights at King Island? What was his real purpose for the flight? And most puzzling of all, why has so little wreckage ever been found? The aircraft was equipped with 4 life jackets and an emergency radio beacon, and was designed to stay afloat for several minutes. In most aviation accidents over water, something is found: debris, oil, personal effects. But in Frederick's case, apart from that single engine cowl flap found years later, the Bass Strait kept its secrets. The role of UFO culture in this case cannot be ignored. In the late 1970s, interest in extraterrestrial life was at a peak. Close encounters of the third kind had captured the public imagination. UFO sightings were regularly reported in the media. For someone like Frederick, already predisposed to believe in alien visitors, this cultural moment would have been particularly influential. But does this cultural context explain away the mystery, or does it add another layer? If Frederick was play-acting inspired by a movie, why did he sound so genuinely terrified? If he was simply seeing planets and stars, why did multiple witnesses report unusual lights that night? The photograph taken by Roy Manifold remains one of the most intriguing pieces of evidence. Analyzed by multiple experts, it appears to show a genuine unidentified object in the sky at approximately the time and location of Frederick's disappearance. American photo analysts determined that it was a metallic object, apparently in a cloud of exhaust. It was apparently a mile from the camera. Some have suggested the object in the photograph could be Frederick's plane itself, caught in an unusual attitude or lighting condition. Others maintain it shows something else entirely, perhaps the very object Frederick was describing in his final transmissions. The witness who saw a green light above a diving aircraft adds another compelling element. His account, given independently and before many details of the case were public, aligns remarkably well with Frederick's own description. The fact that he wished to remain anonymous suggests someone who wasn't seeking attention but felt compelled to share what he'd seen. A notable witness. A South Australian farmer allegedly saw a plane lodged against a UFO days after Valentich's disappearance. This account has fueled speculation about the incident. The guy saw the aircraft stuck to the side of them. While this account is more difficult to verify, it adds to the collection of strange reports surrounding the case. As we examine all the evidence, patterns emerge. The multiple witness sightings, the photograph, Frederick's detailed description of the object's behavior all point to something unusual in the skies that night. Whether that something was extraterrestrial, military, or natural phenomenon remains unknown. The official investigation's conclusion that the disappearance was presumed fatal, but the cause could not be determined, leaves room for interpretation. A 2-week-long Department of Transport DOT investigation into Valentich's disappearance was unable to determine the cause, but that it was presumed fatal for Valentich. In recent years, advances in technology have allowed researchers to re-examine the case with fresh eyes. The audio recordings have been analyzed with modern equipment, searching for clues in the background noise. The area where Frederick disappeared has been mapped with greater precision. Yet still, no definitive answers have emerged. As interest in Frederick Valentich's disappearance continues to simmer, there's a strong chance that renewed searches may occur in the Bass Strait. Experts estimate around a 60% likelihood that advanced technology, like underwater drones, will be employed as authorities revisit the case. The possibility of new searches offers hope that someday we might finally know what happened to Frederick Valentich. Modern underwater search technology has located aircraft that have been missing for decades. Perhaps Frederick's Cessna is out there still, waiting to be found, holding the answers to questions that have haunted investigators for nearly half a century. But even if the aircraft is found, will it answer all our questions? Will it explain the lights that witnesses saw, the object in Manifold's photograph, the terror in Frederick's voice as he described something that was not an aircraft? The psychological impact of this case extends beyond just those directly involved. For pilots flying over the Bass Strait, Frederick's disappearance serves as a cautionary tale. For UFO researchers, it's one of the most credible cases on record, featuring a trained observer in radio contact throughout the encounter. For skeptics, it's a puzzle that challenges conventional explanations. Furthermore, everyone who has heard the original recording says the same thing. The recordings were extremely disturbing and seemed to be absolutely true. In fact, it seems that the panic in Valentich's voice was so chilling that it would have been practically impossible to fake, and that noise and did not at all resemble a plane crashing into water. The authenticity of Frederick's fear is perhaps the most compelling aspect of the case. This wasn't someone making a hoax call or playing a prank. This was a young man who genuinely believed he was in danger, who was experiencing something that terrified him. Whether that something was real or imagined, external or internal, remains the central mystery. Looking at Frederick's life before that fateful night, we see a young man caught between dreams and reality. He wanted desperately to fly professionally, but struggled with the academic requirements. He believed in UFOs, but lived in a world that often mocked such beliefs. He was building his hours as a pilot, but making mistakes that suggested he might not have been ready for the challenges he would face. The letter also requests an expert evaluation of Valentich's mental stability. The harshness of the letter seems to be unprofessional and unfair towards the missing pilot. The derisive tone reveals apparent prejudice against Frederick on the part of the authorities. This official attitude toward Frederick reveals something about how his disappearance was viewed by some in authority. Rather than a tragedy to be investigated with compassion, it was sometimes treated as an embarrassment, a problem to be explained away. This dismissive attitude may have contributed to the lack of thorough investigation in the early stages. The timing of Frederick's disappearance, just as he was facing continued failures in his commercial pilot exams, has led some to speculate about his state of mind. Was he depressed, desperate, or was he simply a young man pursuing his dreams despite setbacks, out for a routine flight that went tragically wrong? The destination of Valentich's final flight was King Island, but his motivation for the flight is unknown. This uncertainty about why he was flying that night adds another layer of mystery. Was he really picking up friends as he'd claimed? Was it a training flight, or was there some other purpose he hadn't shared? The fact that he didn't arrange for runway lights at King Island suggests either poor planning or that he never intended to land there. Some have speculated he was using the King Island story as cover for other plans. But what those plans might have been, we can only guess. As we near the end of this story, we must confront the reality that we may never know what happened to Frederick Valentich. The sea keeps its secrets well, and time has a way of obscuring truth. Witnesses pass away, memories fade, evidence degrades. Yet the mystery endures, as compelling today as it was on that October night in 1978. What we do know is that a young man with dreams of flying professionally took off from Melbourne and never returned. We know he reported seeing something that frightened him, something he couldn't identify or explain. We know that multiple witnesses saw unusual lights in the sky that night. We know that an aircraft and its pilot vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions and 17 seconds of metallic noise. The legacy of Frederick Valentich extends beyond his own story. His disappearance has become a cautionary tale about the mysteries that still exist in our world, about the limits of our understanding. It reminds us that even in an age of radar and satellites, someone can simply vanish, leaving behind only a voice on a radio saying, "It's not an aircraft." For the believers, Frederick's case is proof that we are not alone, that there are forces at work beyond our comprehension. For the skeptics, it's a reminder of how human perception can fail, how fear and confusion can transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. For the investigators, it's an unsolved puzzle that continues to challenge and frustrate, but perhaps most importantly, for Frederick's family and friends, it's a wound that never fully heals. Every October 21st marks another anniversary of loss, another year without answers. The memorial plaque at Cape Otway Lighthouse stands as a testament to a life cut short, dreams unfulfilled, questions unanswered. While some people believe Valentich may have suffered from disorientation, others speculate on the possibility of alien involvement. It raises the question, was his disappearance truly an accident or something more profound? In the end, the disappearance of Frederick Valentich remains what it has always been, a mystery. Was it pilot error, a tragic accident caused by disorientation and inexperience? Was it suicide, staged disappearance, or an elaborate hoax gone wrong? Or was it something else entirely, an encounter with the unknown that ended in the unthinkable? The truth is, we don't know. And perhaps that's what makes this story so enduringly powerful. In an age where we think we have all the answers, where technology promises to solve every mystery, Frederick Valentich reminds us that some questions remain stubbornly unanswered. His voice, captured on those recordings, speaking of lights and objects that shouldn't be there, echoes across the decades as a reminder of the mysteries that still exist in our world. As you go about your life, perhaps occasionally glancing up at the night sky, remember Frederick Valentich. Remember the young man who wanted nothing more than to fly, who encountered something inexplicable in the darkness above the Bass Strait. Remember that sometimes people vanish without explanation, leaving behind only questions and the haunting sound of static where a voice should be. And remember his final words, spoken with a mixture of confusion and certainty. Words that have echoed through the years and entered into legend. It's hovering. And it's not an aircraft. Whatever Frederick saw that night, whatever happened in those final moments, one thing is certain. He encountered something that changed him from a person into a mystery, from a pilot into a legend. And somewhere, perhaps, in the vast expanse of the Bass Strait or beyond, the answers to what happened on October 21st, 1978, are still waiting to be discovered. The disappearance of Frederick Valentich serves as a powerful reminder that our world still holds mysteries, that there are things beyond our understanding, and that sometimes on a clear night over dark waters, the impossible becomes real, the unexplained becomes undeniable, and a young man's dreams of flight transform into humanity's enduring questions about what else might be sharing our skies.